need more. Certain topics which were common to all the bring along all the experts to help us understand the topic much better and to learn from each other on the issue. So without any further delay, I will hand over the session to our moderator, Mr. Carlos Hernandez, who's an international cooperation expert with very progressive, responsible experience on anti-corruption, security, law enforcement, and intelligence. Over to you, Carlos.
Can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes, Carlos.
Oh, perfect. So as I was saying, I'm going to moderate this very important webinar that is we'll talk about protecting data privacy in terms of COVID-19 in the private sector. So I am very, very happy to be here. We have a very great experts perfectly chosen for this topic that I will introduce in a minute. But first, let me give you some information that we need to follow during our webinar. To be able to listen smoothly up to our experts, I'm going to ask to everybody to mute your microphones, and when the expert need to speak, please unmute. I want to pay attention how to deal with that, so we cannot interrupt the presentations. We're going to receive questions throughout the session, so please, all the participants are invited to submit it by the chat, and after the discussion, the team will going to choose some of them, and we can ask to our experts. Remember that the session will be recorded, so you will have the opportunity to watch it again and share it with your colleagues in your country. So please follow Alliance for Integrity social media. Okay, so we need to start, and I'm very happy to present some of the experts around the world. This is a very great effort that Alliance for Integrity is doing because we identified experts for continents. We have Europe, we have America, we have Africa, and we have Asia. First of all, we have Patricia Peck Pinheiro, head of the Digital and Cyber Law Prize and Conclaves Abogados Association in Brazil. From Germany, we have Dr. Christian Seppel, a partner at Dentons. From Ghana, we have Mr. Frank Abdullah Idrisu, financial crime investigator. And from India, we have Mr. Srinivas Pusara, Chief Privacy and DPO worldwide. I'm going to ask to our experts to present your background yourself, because I think I'm going to be doing better by you. And if you can give us a very brief context of the situation regarding the COVID, but particularly what are you dealing on data privacy topics? Please, maybe we can start with Dr. Peck.
Thank you, Hernandez. First of all, I'd like to thank Alliance of Integrity for the invitation to be here and represent Brazil in this important panel. As said, I have my PhD on international law at University of São Paulo and 20 years of legal practice here in my country with 26 books published on this topic of cyber law, cybersecurity, and data privacy. So I'd like to share with you all some of information on the context of Brazil. Of course, we are more exposed and more vulnerable on this so fast digital move that we have had because of the pandemic context of the last few months. So here in Brazil, we were not prepared to all that. Not even on thinking on a basis on governance approach or private sector approach. The fact is that we all underestimated the time needed to implement this kind of regulation in this level of a data privacy regulation. So in the size and complexity of a country like Brazil, with more than 200 million people, citizens, so we didn't had time enough to make all the efforts and the homework necessary. And during this period of the last 2 years, we are taking on economic crisis, political crisis, and now this health crisis. So it's too much to manage it. And so we so far our regulation didn't take place. We have postponed the Brazilian data privacy regulation twice already. So already we have extended it to become enforcement for May 2021. And we don't believe that all institutions will be prepared until May 2021. And also, we don't have already our data protection authority that's so relevant to implement this kind of regulation. So considering either a technical approach or a cultural approach over cybersecurity and data protection best practice, we have a long run to be done. And I believe that because we need investments, that takes a lot of money. It's not easy to implement software, security softwares, and all the controls that this regulation demands. And with this pandemic context, it's going to be really a huge trial to everyone here to prioritize. It's our most challenge right now. And for a specific area of the small business and the startups, it's most difficult because we also have a lack of teamwork. Yeah. We are having this problem as well. So that's like an overview that I can give you all what we are going on over here in Brazil. Thank you.
Something very important that you're saying is nobody was prepared, and we are dealing with that, no, and all around the world, not only in Brazil, all around the world. We have that problem. We didn't have anything prepared for this. We didn't understand this kind of crisis because maybe it didn't happen. It didn't happen before, at least in the recent history. Mr. Frank Abdullah from Ghana, please, if you can introduce yourself and give us just very briefly a statement about how is the situation in Ghana and in the region, it will be very useful.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Frank Abdullah Idrisu, financial crime investigator for Fidelity Bank Ghana Limited. I hold a postgraduate diploma in cybersecurity from Amity Future Academy, India, and I am also a graduate of computer science, all in the banking and waste management space. But in respect of issues of COVID, what I would say is that from the Ghana perspective, what we saw was that in terms of business continuity, most agencies were not really ready for a natural disaster like this. Most of the things that has happened in the past had to do with theoretical approaches to the issue of business continuity. So when the natural disaster came and there was the need for agencies to now implement what they've documented as their business continuity measures, it became a challenge. Notwithstanding that, the government decided to put in place measures to curb the spread of the virus, either through importation and also through community spread. The first which happened was the government decided to block all transits into the country, quarantine people for mandatory 14 days who are coming into the country, so as to ensure that they are not importing the issue of COVID into the country. And then the vice president also brought up an app that will help in the tracking of people infected with COVID, so the government will be able to determine which areas are hotspots so that it can advise the populace. It hasn't been that rosy. Initially, the spread was just too slow, but over the past weeks, after going through a partial lockdown, over the past weeks, there seem to be a sharp increase in the rate of infection, where in the past week, information available to us is the infection rate is between 400 persons a day, which is not too encouraging. But I think the government is doing all that it can in consultation with the health experts to be able to address this problem. And as we speak, things are not too bad compared to other areas in the world. But in the sub-region, if you take the West African context, then Nigeria and Ghana, who are bigger players in the West African sub-region, then you want to say our figures are quite high. And then government is doing everything within its mandate to be able to drastically reduce the numbers or stop the spread within the community. And there's one thing that comes into bear when government, for instance, is using an application, then the issue of personal data is going to be collected from each of the citizens now comes to play, and where that personal data is going to be kept and where that personal data is going to be processed, it becomes an issue, because in the course of contact tracing, most of the data collection process is manual. Even though there exists a mobile app, most of the contact tracing is manual. And because most of the contact tracing is manual, then there will be the need to put in place physical security controls to handle that aspect so that there will not be a compromise of that personally identifiable information. Thank you. I think that is the perspective from Ghana.
No, and you said something very important. How do we balance the continuity, but at the same time, the spreading of the virus? You know, this is a big challenge of the country, and you finished with very important topic: the breach, the technological breach that we have around the region. No, thank you very much. Mr. Christian Sanford from Germany, could you please introduce yourself and give us a very brief insight about the situation?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity joining this webinar and giving my presentation. I'm a lawyer at Dentons in Berlin, capital of Germany in the European Union, and where the COVID situation, just returning from a decent lunch with colleagues, life is now nearly back to normal. Only if there are hotspots with new COVID cases, the German government usually imposes a contact prohibition. We did not have a lockdown, we had contact prohibition, so you were not allowed to contact, we were only allowed to contact one person at one time. However, the consequences of that was that home office and computer communication became much more apparent than before, which causes a threat. And we now have a lot of clients, a lot of companies where the employees were doing home office work and they received information, they received suspicious mails, but did not discover that they were suspicious. And then suddenly hackers were able to join into the company networks. So this is the big threat now, not only the biological virus, but also the IT viruses or the IT intruders, which are getting in there. I'm active since 1996 in data privacy and data security, and now it's called cybersecurity. Before it was called data security. Actually, the challenges remain the same. However, because the more spread use of computers, the openness of networks just pose a bigger threat to companies as they have to cope with this new situation and get on. So we have to rely on certain initiatives, but I think that will be a later part of the webinar. So that's the situation here in Europe, in Germany, and yeah.
Oh, thank you. Something very important, as you were saying, is everything changed, I think. And one of the main things is that now we are working, and for example, now we are doing this webinar from our houses. So how security is going to play a very important role in cybersecurity in the home office approaches and strategies. Thank you. And finally, please, Mr. Srinivas Postras from India, please could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Srinivas. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with the distinguished panel. So I'm an engineer by profession and with about 30 years of industry experience. And last 10 years, I've been playing the role of Chief Privacy Officer and Data Protection Officer for a company called Infosys, which is a global IT consulting and services company. And of late, during my profession, I also completed my postgraduate diploma in cyber law. So that's my background. I'm also active in the standard space and the advisory board of IAPP. On India, the situation is this is a country with its largest democratic country in the world. There's a huge impetus for the data-driven economy and the digitally driven society. A lot of focus on promoting the digital industry. And data privacy, it's obviously it's extremely important for the country. We don't have, unlike many of the European nations, we don't have a omnibus comprehensive data protection law, but we have several other provisions which apply to the industry and various organizations. One of the most important is from our constitution, which is Article 21, which talks about protection of life and personal liberty. And in 2017, in a very famous judgment, Supreme Court has held that right to privacy is part of this article. And that was a very important milestone in the history of privacy in India, which also triggered an important chapter that of making a law. So a committee was created, headed by one Justice Sri Krishna, to draft a data protection bill. That bill was prepared and put in the public media, public space, and after soliciting comments, it was updated. And in 2019 December, it was presented in the Parliament. Subsequently, the situation today is that that bill is submitted to a joint parliamentary committee for reviewing and coming out with what should be the law. So it is presently stalled there, and we are not sure when it will come, but it's very important. We are eager to wait for that bill. In addition, as of now, there was an Information Technology Act 2000, which got amended in 2008. As part of that, there is a IT rules. It's called Information Technology Rules 2011, which is a kind of data privacy bill, which is today, if you ask me what is the legislation, that is the only legislation which we follow, but it is not a parliamentary legislation, it's a IT rules. It was prepared by the executive body, but it is the only, and it applies to sensitive personal information. So that is the bill we today widely follow, but the new bill which is about to come is the one which will impact the entire industry, and we are just waiting for that to come. And on the COVID situation, in India was one of the first countries in the initial part we had to put lockdown, as you all know, and there was very good containment. The numbers were contained, but of course, off late, as the lockdown had to be released, the numbers seems to be increasing. Like in most other countries, I think the numbers are going up. It is bound to happen, but nobody can predict what will be the right thing to do, and we just hope that the measures being taken are somehow going to help with a lot of promotion on both digital drives as well as wearing mask, and then the entire machinery is ready to face prepared to face the outcome.
Sure.
Sort of the positive outlook. More of it I will speak subsequently.
Yeah, and here you state something very important. And all countries have different regulations. I think this is a very good opportunity to share good practices and a good opportunity to help other countries that are not maybe well developed in this area, in the area of food. Well, you are giving a very important context. I just will add that everything changed, and our business, our learning, our entertainment, everything become virtual, as you were saying, and technology has supported this situation, how the countries are facing this situation, and is trying to identify treatments, is helping to trace the virus in order to prevent the spreading of the virus. And but this situation obviously become us vulnerable. So and all this technology and devices are fed by our personal data. And in that moment, some of the international organizations, some of the national authorities have identified that our personal data has been used. We have many regulations around the world, but we have one specifically in the European Union that came into effect in May 2018, and I was referring to European Union General Data Protection Regulations. And the GDPR rules give us some idea how companies can and cannot do with our personal data. It's very important international legislation because what is happening to impact globally. So considering business are now internationals, and something very important, it established fines for those that do not comply with it. And recently, maybe all of you are aware, the UN Secretary General just released a roadmap for digital cooperation. And one of the recommendations that this document highlights is an effective personal data protection and the protection of the right to privacy in line with the international standards. So let me ask you, Dr. Peck, could you give us some specific examples about the risks and challenges that business is facing today in this virtual world?
Yes, Hernandez. Well, first, we had a risk increase related not just for violation of right to privacy, but also cybercrime in general here in Brazil, with identity thief and electronic fraud has increased. And we are having a problem with this message using the social engineering approach, manipulating the coronavirus information to make people go through it and then have this IT virus disseminating. So it's a huge problem that we are going through. So people get their data more exposure, and companies as well, because the fact is the last 3 months we have this home office environment. So we are much more working in a domestic place and with a lack of cybersecurity education. So also we are having big brands, the big companies getting involved with data leaks here. And if the big companies have these problems, imagine the small and medium business, what's happening as well. So what we can say that this increase of the usage of virtual tools in a domestic place has already had this effect. And because we don't have already have this enforcement by law on the best practice on data protection to all society and to all business and also to government as well, to make that domino effect that everyone has to demand to the other the requirements on cybersecurity. So we are living in a situation really more vulnerable. That's what's happening right now. So even little things like, having this vulnerability on the IT vulnerability, like very problems with passwords, weak passwords on their Wi-Fi access at home. You know, that's very easy to go through it and to access, or maybe not having like antivirals in their mobile phones and their notebooks at home. So everything gets much more easier for attacks, for cyber criminals, and also the more sophisticated situations that can go and attack like hospitals, financial institutions, also all these e-commerce stores, because we are using more all these tools, these digital tools. That's what we are facing here, considering risks and challenges. So the challenges are how to accelerate the measures related to implement all this best practice in this moment that there is no money at all to invest and to prioritize what's considered necessary to have a more secure environment to protect personal data. And the companies are managing more really sensitive personal data because of the health related sensitive personal data because of coronavirus. So what we are saying now is that we might have a necessity for a loan. You know, government should give more a loan to help the institutions to invest on cybersecurity and data protection. Not just bring the law, the regulation, but bring also the financial help to implement the regulation.
Sure. And something very important that highlighted Dr. Peck and Mr. Sunivas was e-commerce. Today,
Yes.
we rely on e-commerce a lot, and maybe Mr. Sunivas, you can tell us what is the risk that you see and challenges specifically in this area, because I'm quite sure that our audience is really, really interested.
Right. Yeah, I see that traditionally e-commerce was used as a trading platform to deliver products, purchase products, deliver services. But increasingly, the need for adoption is towards entertainment industry, online education. There's a huge acceptance of that. In fact, to start with, there was resistance. In fact, even today, there are a lot of different schools of thought that whether we should go for online education for children or not, due to various reasons. But eventually, looks like online education, once people get comfortable with it and more infrastructure gets better, the adoption will be higher. And with that, we have newer problems coming. The problems are in terms of people who are traditionally not used to working on the internet. There are lots of that segment: children, elderly, people who are senior citizens, who are not traditionally the ones who use internet. They go and purchase things in a shop, or physically they are used to looking at goods. So such people will have a problem of using internet, and the threats from cyber threats, from frauds, from security related malwares, etc., is significantly likely to rise because of phishing and various, for this vulnerable population, including children. And I think that's where the focus must be very heavy, both from regulators as well as from the organizations. The regulators, I think I see a need for the regulators to increase the enforcement mechanisms to make people aware and let consumers come forward to see that the industry gears up to meet these, to mitigate these emerging threats. The other thing I would see is also maybe it's time for us to sector-specific standards. Let's say what is privacy or cybersecurity in education means. What does it mean for instance, in US we have a law called COPPA, right? Children Online Privacy Protection Act. So similarly, we need to have sectoral specific laws which will help, or standards which will help for industry to adopt and go for certification, that will give an assurance for consumers, whether they're children, whether they're teachers, students, to see that privacy aspects are taken care of, security aspects are taken care of. And possibly there is a standard called ISO 27701, which got published last September. That is the only standard in the world which which is on Privacy Information Management System, PIMS. So I feel that more organizations can adopt that standard that will provide an assurance to consumers that the privacy aspects are taken care of. That is actually regulation agnostic, although it emulates GDPR to a great extent. It is completely regulation agnostic, similar to 27,000 in the space of cybersecurity. The other area I also see, you asked about e-commerce, but I would like to add is from home. So there is a much greater need for work from home in today's pandemic situation, which people thought that it may last for a few months, few weeks and months, a few quarters, but looks like this looks to be lasting quite long, and it may last for a year. And more importantly, when people get used to work from home, as we see people are getting used to work from home, then it's likely that this becomes a norm, new norm, right? We all talk of new norm. I'm not sure, nobody knows what will be that figure, but there are companies which came forward and even assured that 50% of my workforce will work from home, 30%. People are throwing those numbers, nobody has clue, but what will happen eventually. But definitely there are some indications that a lot of companies may go for work from home in the long term. Now that brings in newer dimensions, particularly in addition to security, which I spoke before, risk of security. In addition to that, we also have a newer dimension coming from the need to monitor the work itself. So traditionally, we all were used to working. Work means for us seeing our staff in the office, meeting across the table, discussing our meetings in somebody presents, somebody talks, and you come to decision making. From there, the world today moved towards completely discussing over Microsoft, tools on WebEx, on Zoom, whichever is the platform. So this led to, while this is good, while this is useful, definitely useful, but there may be a demand for people to say that we want to monitor work productivity. How do we know that work productivity is same as what it used to be when you were in office? If that situation comes, there may be a need for more surveillance in the sense of in the terms of ensuring that employees are putting the right effort, putting they're spending their hours in terms of delivering what company expects in a full-time employment particularly. So that itself actually is privacy intrusive. Some of these technologies, if you use to do monitoring and surveillance, they can get into the space of personal space of both physically in terms of, for instance, in my home, I'm a mother may be having a small baby, they may be having family who are regularly coming to the work, and it's very difficult to continuously put a video camera on, for instance, or if you expect that to monitor at any time what applications I'm looking at. There are tools in the market already available which talks about monitoring which applications are open and employees are accessing. You might in between leisure and go to YouTube and watch a video while working. So wow. all those although the tools tell that okay, no company expects that you don't take breaks, but that itself, the very thought of the need for monitoring and the availability of such tools is potentially putting employee privacy at a little bit of risk in my view. I'm not saying that some companies are going for it or not going. I don't have a picture yet, but I see this is another area of concern where so DPOs like me and many of you will have to, our role should be as data privacy professionals to balance the interest, legitimate business interest, and weigh it with the employees' needs for privacy and see that we maintain the right balance when we allow to do that. Maybe to a certain extent it's required. Normally, work output is supposed to be in not in terms of how many hours are you working, but it's about what you generate at the end of the day. But sometimes there is a need in certain professions to also see whether you are engaged continuously. In such situations, possibly the least intrusive technology should be used is what I think is a greater concern. So that's what I will sum up with. These are two major concerns I see.
Okay. Just before going to the next questions, I just want to remind you that we are recording this webinar, and if one of you, the participants, don't want to be recorded, you can go to YouTube because we are live streaming there too, and please send your question in the chat. Something very important, maybe Christian, something important that Mrs. Rivas was telling us is about surveillance. And we have another powerful violence that we have seen that is a big challenge because companies, technology companies have developed very important applications in order to trace the virus and prevent this spreading. But at the same time, some experts, and you know that have stated that this could be in one way, it could be in one way dangerous regarding to the use of data, of the personal data. So what do you think, how do you see this increasing surveillance by the government authority across the world? Christian, and maybe later Frank can give us some insight, please.
Well, we had a quite big discussion in Germany because very soon it became apparent that an app would help to trace contacts. And as you know, in Europe, we have the General Data Protection Regulation. We have a very strong approach towards personal data and privacy. And especially in Germany, where the Constitutional Court in the 70s has already ruled that you have a human right of information self-determination. So that was actually the early name for data privacy. So this is a very high challenge in Germany. Nevertheless, the government was together with SAP and the German Telecom able to develop a contact tracing app on a full anonymized basis. So it does not, apart from your own personal data, as it is usually in an app, and together with the information systems or the basic operational systems of Google and Apple, that's where the app is working on. But it's able to nearly completely anonymize it because there is a measurement through Bluetooth about how near you are to a person, and then there is a pseudonym, a kind of key being produced. And if somebody later on has the virus and gets tested positively, then the system is able to trace back, use the keys, and provides you with information that there was somebody beside you having COVID, so that you can turn to a hospital or you can turn to the health agency to get tested. So that's the approach. So far, there are not that many COVID cases in Germany, so there is not yet a real test about this. It had been tested with the military, so they had to practice certain situations, and there was a more theoretical test. However, we will see how it will work. So far, no big news. I personally have it on my mobile phone. So far, everything is green. I've never met somebody so far who had the virus. Well, we will see how this will work. So it is actually, and there was a lot of discussion in the press if data privacy should be evaluated higher than health and the prevention against COVID-19 or not, and that is decided for more privacy. However, they are of the opinion that is sufficiently secure and would sufficiently able to trace any part. So we will see how this works. That's the approach here by the German government. And so far as I know, I think it's the only tracing app in Europe which is actually at the moment being active. And it's already now working since 3 weeks.
Oh, okay. And Frank, how this works when we have the challenge, as you were saying at the beginning, when we have the challenge of the data is collected by paper. What is the challenge that we face in this case?
Now, you know, when data is collected, it goes through certain stages. The first stage is when the data is not being utilized. The other stage is when it's being utilized. If it's not being utilized, for instance, during the stage of collection, in a physical state, that is, you are writing on a physical document, there is the likelihood that that data can be compromised, either compromised through shoulder surfing, which is people standing there and having the ability to be able to see personal information, and any form of what compromise that comes in the form of physical attacks on the people who, because these individuals walk from various homes to home. They are, most of these people are actually not even permanent employees of the government. These are contractual employees of the government. And there's also the likelihood that persons can easily do what? Give off data in exchange of what? Looking at it from that point of view, there should be, of course, the issue of privacy comes to bear. Individuals, of course, it was not discussed as it did in the West extensively regarding how these data will be collected, and then how the data will be processed, how the data will be stored. These were all issues that were not discussed. And so we look at it from the data protection point of view, then you begin to think that citizens or data subjects will be alarmed because they do not know how the data is going to be processed. They do not know how this data is even going to be stored, if it's going to be secured or not. So these are the concerns you begin to see in industry, you begin to see in the country. But I think government, of course, can also use secured platforms like safes, of course, fireproof safes, because these things will be scanned and the scanned documentations will be sent via emails. However, the physical ones will not be discarded immediately because of what they need to do follow-ups with some of these documentation in the event of trying to either reconfirm data or trying to ensure that the data is complete. So even though it's captured manually, it will be sent through electronic means. However, the danger is that when it's being handled at the beginning of the collection stage, it is susceptible to what? Compromise. It is susceptible to compromise, either from people around the vicinity who are seeing the data real time, or anybody who can compromise the data in transit in the course of the process, the data getting to whichever hub will process it and send to government. So these are two of the key issues that will come up because individuals are beginning to feel sensitized because our Data Protection Act more or less replicates the GDPR, more or less replicates most of the provisions of the GDPR are captured in our Data Protection Act. And because most of the provisions are captured from the GDPR, then citizens were expecting some level of transparency in respect of their data is being collected, how the data is going to be processed, how the data is going to be stored, especially if it's going to be secured. All these were not done. So there seemed to be some level of concern. However, government will also balance this with the fact that there is a public health crisis and is going to the government is doing everything to protect the citizenry. To some extent, there is a very huge balance that people need to understand. People can come in to say that their privacy, their right to privacy is being invaded. Because when you go to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, it treats privacy as a human right. And because it treats privacy as a human right, it says that no one should be what? Subjected to any arbitrary interference with his privacy relating to home correspondence, everyone's right to protection. So people take the international concept, look at global happenings, and they now begin to be some level of little agitations. But in the context of what is happening, I think if the government improves the controls around handling of data, then citizenry will be okay because now there's a bargain between your health against your data which is being collected and processed. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And in this sense, Dr. Peck, something that's very interesting we were saying is how to balance. I think this is very important topic. How to balance, how governments can balance the control of the pandemics and at the same time not exposing the privacy of data, because as Frank and Christian were saying, I think these applications are very useful. The technology can be useful for good things. So how we can balance this situation? Maybe in America or in Brazil, for example.
Yes. Yes, Hernandez, I think it's a good point, a good question. And we have to use as much technology to fight this disease, of course. But the point is, can't be unlimited. So how to balance privacy, one side, and then the other side, the need of social health and security. And I believe that transparency is the first thing to be used as a mean of balance. So we need to have a lot of transparency of the use of the data of the citizens, because all these apps, these applications, how this information is going to be used. And it can't be forever or for any use, any destination. So we really need as well to give more information regarding the application of the principle of minimization that's also presented on data privacy regulations, so the transparency and the minimization of the use for specific applications, it's very important. And I can say that maybe one thing that should have been done by international organizations such as the World Trade Organization, as to conduct this kind of topic into international treaty, because it happens to become like national regulations in more than 100 countries, and each one is like trying to implement in different ways. And we are living in a global society, and like this virus, it spreads so fast, like information. It goes worldwide, very fast. So maybe we should be leading with all these things in a much more multi way, in a multi approach with countries, all in a treaty, international treaty, and not like this in a national and different approaches. And that's maybe why we are not being able to go fast and fight back all these things. But I really believe that transparency and limiting the usage, and also that can't be like timeless. It has to be a period of time, and then the citizen has to exercise the right of asking to erase that data after the time has gone, and you have no necessity to be processing that information. The problem that we see is that information is power, and the misuse of it can happen so easy. So who controls who is making the surveillance, And that's the point, that probably this regulation needs a lot of fiscalization.
Oh, thank you. This is a very important, I think, questions, and I would like to as well, Mrs. Rodriguez, give us some inputs, because Asia is one of the regions, if I'm not wrong, that have developed much more applications in this way. So, how do you think we can balance this situation, Mrs. Rivas?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. In India, actually, we had an app called Arogya Setu, which was developed by the government, and very early stages it was released. And the app had all the functionalities to be able to capture, to detect using Bluetooth. I think Patricia mentioned that. And it was wide publicity was given to for adoption by people. And I think very good adoption happened. But however, I cannot know the exact number. But what I see is the mandate, issuing a mandate is extremely difficult. So you cannot enforce in a manner where you say that every person has to have. You did promote, but the key thing I think Patricia also mentioned is, in my view, is the success of any such measure in digital means depends on adoption of by everyone. All the people, if they download the app, all the people have it, and then only we can actually effectively control the disease. To that extent, there are certain limitations. And one of them she already mentioned is about the government has to provide assurance that the data will not be used or will not be allowed to be used by anyone for some future purpose. It could be for surveillance, it could be for anything. We don't know. The new users always emerge out, right? That assurance is extremely important, and that will be a way to get confidence in people that it will be not kept indefinitely, it will be deleted. The data minimization was suggested, and a lot of changes happened in the app in the early stages to see that it is privacy compliant. And in fact, the government also made the code available for people to review when there were some people raised about issues about how the app works, etc. But key thing I see is still that the adoption is extremely difficult, and even if you force, actually, there are people whose mobile phones do not have the ability to have that app. They could be outdated. The infrastructure has to support. They may be in remote places where the mobile network is poor, electricity is not working. Those are some of the challenges we see. And even if you say that people actually download, what if they switch off their Bluetooth, they switch off their GPS? And even worst, what if they want to intentionally beat the system? They can leave the mobile phone at home and walk around physically. So it is extremely difficult to enforce in that sense where you can anybody can say that guaranteed everybody will be having it. The key thing here is to be able to educate, create awareness that how it is important and how the data will be assured and it will not be used for any other purpose. I think that is the means by which you can increase the adoption of this, and this becomes a necessity as we go along.
And we have a very interesting question here, and maybe Dr. Christian can help us to answer. These questions come from our audience. And we are talking about a government, but what about employers and what about workers? I mean, what about if the use of employers of information of health information of other workers? How are you dealing with that? Is this happening in Germany? What can you tell us?
It's very difficult for me to understand the question. Sorry for that.
Yeah, they are asking what they're asking about this kind of application of this kind of tools can gather information, the whole information of everybody. So, what are the uses that companies are doing from their workers? I mean, are they collecting health information from them? What is the challenges or risks that companies have health information from workers?
Well, it's limited. Of course, on one side, as being the employer, you have the obligation to protect your employees at the workplace. However, on the other side, you have to balance this against the rights of the employee. And especially information about the health status is sensitive information, and it is very difficult to obtain this information. So you may request people to do a test. You will not know if they're well, at the end you will get the information that the person is perhaps infected or has a disease or health issue. So this person has to stay at home. However, you're not allowed to provide further information to other fellow employees. So that's you can require a measurement, but you will get only the information, positive or negative. You will not get any further information. It has to be strictly limited to the very necessary to protect other employees on the working place. So it needs quite some logic to evaluate a way to find out how this information can be gathered and how this information can be used. This is in line with the GDPR data minimization concept, which does not allow, I would say, to make it easy to gather as much information as possible, to have it easy assessed and receive an easy information situation. So you have to think about, you have to be quite smart to develop an approach to use as few information as possible, like this government app for the tracing of COVID users. They developed lots. They used a lot of long time to develop an algorithm using as few personal data as possible to allow the maximum of protection. However, it's possible to find out if people are infected, for example, to measure their temperature by remote systems, but you can only send them to a doctor. You cannot stop them. And it's also working time, so they get paid for being sent to the doctor, and only when the doctor finds out or states that there is an illness, then they are in the health insurance area. So that's also something of protection.
Thank you very much. And Frank, we are talking about companies, but what about supply chain? I mean, with this massive digitalization, for sure, the supply chain of the bigger companies or the small and medium-sized companies are struggle with the compliance of data privacy. No, what can you tell us about, Frank?
Okay, thank you very much. I think when it comes to compliance in terms of digitization concerning multinational companies and then small to medium-sized companies, there are 3 or more factors that come to play. One of the key factors is that we begin to realize that there's some poor mining of data. Poor mining of data comes into bear where it's unfortunately companies are not able to get the direct insight into data, which will help them take certain rapid decisions that they need to take. So for instance, I have the ERP system in place, but because my data is sitting in silos, I do not even trust my own data. And when it happens that way, that poor data management causes me not to be able to do what? To take certain decisions that will impact on my progression and on my supply chain. The second has to do with the issue of inadequate talent to manage the supply chain. If you look at technology is growing at a faster rate. Now we have issue of artificial intelligence, we have issue of robotics, and in the supply chain, robotics is playing a huge role. Now, if you don't have human capital that have the requisite skill to be able to manage these emerging technologies, then it means that multinational companies or whichever company is in the supply chain is going to be impacted negatively. That is where companies must begin to look at how they can leverage on the emerging technologies, but ensure that they have the requisite personnel who can do manage these to give them the desired results. Look at the issue of integrating data security into the supply chain governance. It's also very important. When you come to the issue of the supply chain, you have to think of the fact that they say a chain is as strong as its weakest link. It comes to play if you are dealing with third parties and you are GDPR compliant and your third party is not within the GDPR zone. Meanwhile, they are supposed to comply with the GDPR regulation because they are processing data of European Economic Area citizens. How are you going to align with these third parties to ensure that they also follow through with the requirements of your economic area? Very, very critical. We all know the sanctions that go with GDPR. 4% of your annual turnover and what have you. So it's not something that is easy, but companies should look at trying to integrate data security into their supplier governance. Now, the other issue that comes up is inability of companies to classify their suppliers and their data. Inability of the companies to classify their suppliers and their data. The classification of critical suppliers, because it's not every supplier that you'll be giving certain attention to depending on the data that they handle. So the classification of critical suppliers should be something that you match with the relevant data which is made available to them. You have to understand how and where the organization's data sits, because you are feeding them with the data and you are regulated by GDPR, you are regulated by the Data Protection Act, for instance, in the case of Ghana. If such third parties are not having an effective regime to secure the data in their possession, then there is the likelihood, if they are compromised, you will also be subject to what? Fines. You will also be subject to fines. These are things that companies can guide against by ensuring that once they go into the supply chain economy, their stakeholders are also complying with the requisite regulations that exist, which they are supposed to do what? To work with. The other issue that needs to be addressed, which is a challenge, is the issue of getting a technical aspect, the issue of getting a data protection officer to manage the data flows, the data streams within your supply chain. Because as a supply chain entity, you deal with huge streams of data. If you don't have a subject matter expert who is going to understand how you implement protection regimes, then you are going to struggle to understand your data flows through your suppliers, through your customers, through your business relationships. This has far-reaching effect. This has a far-reaching effect, which is why companies should look at the possibility of getting, of course, it can be a staff member, but the EU also allows, data protection allows for companies to be able to leverage on the knowledge of experts. So if you have an expert who is not in your company, that expert can still give you technical consultancy that will ensure that you align with the provisions of the regulation. And then finally, the issue I have to close with has to do with inability to audit suppliers. Inability to audit suppliers. Because audit exists to give reasonable assurance to businesses and then their stakeholders. There is a robustness in the control environment. If businesses are not able to audit their stakeholders to be sure that the control environment they assure them that they have actually exists, what is going to happen is that we're going to use the normal checklist approach, where do you have that, then we take. Do you have that, we take. What of if the people are not having? If they are not having, the repercussions are that you also be as liable as whoever breached. So let us look at the issue of supply chain challenges, taking into consideration the various aspects of challenges which stems from mining of data. They need to mine data effectively. They need to have in place very strategic planning processes. They need to ensure that we harness our talents to be able to meet the technologies of tomorrow, the emerging technologies of tomorrow, our ability to integrate data security into our supply governance, our ability to classify the suppliers we have and the data that sits with them, so that we ensure that they put the necessary controls in place to safeguard the data which is in their possession. The ability to get subject matter experts to manage data that transcends, or our processes are audited along the chain. Thank you.
Thank you. And here we have another very, very interesting question. And I think this webinar also has to be very useful for very operational challenges that the audience is facing. But Elia Oliva is sending us, I don't know who wants to answer it, but is asking us, what are the simple tools that you consider can be used in the company to give alerts to collaborators who identify a cyber attack? Who can help me? But Dr. Peck, please. Please unmute unmute your mic, please.
Oh, yes. Hi.
Thank you.
Yes, Hernandez, I saw that question in the chat. It's very interesting. Here in Brazil, what we are doing is we are trying to bring like an app, an application that the employee can access and send to the security team an information when they receive this kind of thing to check it out if it's maybe a cybersecurity attack, and to get information directly from the company about what are the new attacks that are going on. So it's like direct click messages, like a company app that you download on the cell phone, the mobile, and it's more easy to have this communication because of all the social isolation that we are having in this home office right now. That's what they are using.
Oh, in this sense, Dr. Peck, how international organizations, for example, and academia can support these companies, or small companies, in order to understand and enforce the data protection regulation?
Well, I believe academia can have these experts to prepare more content that could be spread to the market and access, like free content, explaining more the concepts on data privacy. Here in Brazil, a lot of people, even from executives, don't really understand what's anonymization, what are the criteria for cryptography, what are the levels that we should apply for cybersecurity, and also maybe academia can put together these work groups that could be collaborating with our data protection authority when we have one, you know, because our regulation is not complete. We have a lot of articles that are not complete, so we need to maybe deliver and some complements for the regulation, which not as detailed as GDPR is. So we didn't finish it already. So maybe to hear the companies and to make this, you know, more close contact to enterprise academia can be, you know, centered this contact of enterprise and this society, and the experts could launch these best practice manuals, you know, so even the small businesses could take advantage of having these lectures, these materials, and we could increase our culture about data privacy and maybe awareness campaign to the citizens as well. I think this protagonism and this leadership should be taken place in academia.
Just to add, I can
please.
add that one of the things is, I think the question is not very clear, but I think one of the things is in cybersecurity is all problems cannot be solved by information security organization. There's a huge participation required from every employee. Every employee becomes a node. So I think some of the companies even run bugs bounty program, where people who encounter a bug or a vulnerability, they report to the right function, you know, which tackles it. And if it's a threat which is across the companies, then you report to the national authority, who's in every country. There's one in India also. We call it CERTAIN, who then collaborates with other industry to develop a fix for that or shares it with vendor bodies. So I think a huge collaborative process is required between employees, industry, tool vendors, all that. That's how it will work.
Oh, thank you very much. We have talked. Well, we are in our last 10 minutes, and we have talked about risks and challenges. But nothing. Well, sorry, not everything is negative. I'm quite sure that we have some best practices, and maybe Christian or Frank can share some of the best practices that you have identified in Germany or in all parts of the world.
Okay.
I'm just looking here at the one question, which I think is very interesting, talking about
Sure.
data flow. How can we analyze it in our companies? Well, it should not come into the data flow in the company. And it's very important. And that's what Slivia said. You have to stop it getting into the company. So it's the awareness of everybody and having a kind of alarm system where people can turn to, have emails checked, or invite somebody from the IT security team to look at their screen remotely to analyze if there is anything suspicious on the screen. And I think, and in the computer, that's most important, because most situations appear when you get a suspicious email, or you get you directed to a suspicious web page, and you give some information there, you just enter anything or just have a mouse click on there, then suddenly you have this connection for a hacker, and the hacker is able to put there either viruses, trojans, or any other means, and is able to get into the data flow of a company. And then it's very often too late, because the only system or the only direct and immediate help is to cut off parts of the system from the remaining parts, from the healthy parts, to avoid spreading of any risk into a company network. And so the answer would be, it's very difficult to measure something. It's the vigilance of anybody being connected to the network which strengthens the force against cyber attack.
Okay.
Thank you.
Frank here.
Yeah, Frank, please.
Yes. Like Doctor just said, when you want to look at trying to get part of your system isolated, which is one of the best practices, security by isolation, you have to, first of all, most businesses begin the issue of trying to protect their information access by jumping into putting in the controls that they have to put in without thinking about doing business impact analysis or getting an inventory of their assets, which sits with them. But one of the best things that entities can ever do is that when you have an information environment which contains information assets, you have to first of all look at trying to create an inventory of all information that sits, and then the data of all the information assets, so that you understand where your data streams and touch points are. Once you do that, it will give you a very good idea on how you classify your data. When you do the classification of your data, you have the right mindset and the technologies to protect which data sets at where based on the level of sensitivity. After that, you have to think about implementing confidentiality countermeasures. The building blocks of information security or data security has to do with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, for you to be able to continue with this, you have to implement confidentiality countermeasures, mostly through encryption, which is very encouraged. Encryption of your data if it's at rest, if the data is passing through networks, if the data is being utilized. You have to put in place strict access control measures around the principle of least privilege, where people who do not have business need to access data or access a resource are not allowed to do that. You have to think about deploying things like intrusion detection systems that will be able to prevent unauthorized modification of data. You have to ensure continuity, and if you want to ensure continuity of your operations, if you want to ensure the continuity of your operations, then you want to think of putting in place controls that will prevent interruptions to your information assets. You have to use a layered approach which we call security in depth, which will help in the various stages of controls you deploy in place fault tolerance systems at either access, storage, or security level, so that you maintain availability of your critical information systems. Now, when it comes to the issue of data governance, you have to first of all think about the fact that your data should be organized, which should be, you have to have, and where is that data residing? That's the first thing you have to think when you are thinking of your data governance as part of your strategy. You have to think of how you secure your data. You have to think about carrying out regular assessment to identify deficiencies, because this is a strategic plan you are putting in place to ensure continuity. You have to put in place data controls around, like I said earlier, on the principle of least privilege. You also have to ensure that you have a data privacy policy. Most organizations just pick the regulation without recourse to having a data privacy policy, which will be aligned with the regulation. Because if you don't have a policy which talks about data, you will not be able to even define how you collect data. You will not be able to define how you process the data. You will not be able to talk. Importantly, employees must be trained. End user awareness is one very important aspect of trying to mitigate against cyber attacks, against data breaches, because once the employee or the data user is informed, majority of the controls will work. Thank you.
Thank you. We cannot answer all the questions from our audience, sorry, but I see one that I don't want to lose because talking about challenges and talking about risk, but this question comes from Mirta Stricker. What are the priority for the companies in terms of data privacy and cybersecurity? And let me ask additionally, do you think because of COVID-19, this priority have changed? Because I remember that before COVID, these areas, data privacy, cybersecurity, used to be look like more like expenditure, like something expenses, something that not necessarily in the company needed. But I think, and please clarify us, I think after COVID, everything changed. Do you think today is a priority for the company? I don't know who can help me to answer this question.
Quickly, if I can add a few lines. Yeah, I think cybersecurity was always a priority in my view, at least for the industry I belong to from my company. It's just that with increasing work from home and ally connected threats, there is much greater focus required because of remote working environment. And that's what is the major change. And of course, increasing phishing attacks and cyber threats have increased because of the same reason. So a much greater focus is required, keeping in view the work environment of home. Otherwise, the focus of cybersecurity was always there.
Thank you. Someone else? Okay, so maybe we can have our last question, and all of you can answer, so we can have different perspective from your side. What do you think are the immediate step of the business and organization can take to ensure compliance with data privacy norms without jeopardizing the market competition? Maybe we can start with Dr. Peck, please.
Thank you, Hernandez. I can say that maybe the immediate steps are first defining the business data strategy. It's one point. What's the data strategy? What's the need for using personal data? And then how we are going to protect the personal data. The second step is use the much as the businesses can apply transparency to the process, because transparency is the biggest principle of this regulation. And it's very important to establish like a long relationship with all the data role holders, and then updating policies and agreements, because everyone, all the stakeholders will have to apply this recommendation. And the last immediate step is to train the team, because you need an updated team with this new regulation to accomplish it.
we have 1 minute left, and maybe someone else can answer a very
I think
answer, please.
if I can speak about it, I think
Yeah, please.
privacy by design should be a way to go forward and treat privacy as a differentiator rather than making it as a compliance burden. Then let privacy be embedded into the culture.
Christian.
Yes, actually, I have to share with Patricia and to say that all the information about what categories of data are used, what are the individuals concerned, what is the purpose, and what is the processing steps should be put together in a data register. That's a core part of any data security system, because there you have an overview about the processing of data, the purposes, and the persons concerned about that. And then you can derive any further measure.
Thank you. Frank, what do you think?
I'm thinking like Dexter said, privacy by design is very important. When you are designing at the very beginning of your design, if you are able to put in place the necessary controls that aligns with the various regulations, it will be very difficult for people to breach data or compromise data. And we have to also look at the issue of ensuring that data as it stands now, it is the biggest thing that is moving the global economy. So all controls, companies most often do not go by standards or best practices. Companies should look at the existing best practices that exist to be able to go about the compliance function to ensure that there is no non-compliance which will lead to sanctions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All this discussion was very useful. We have perspective for all around the world, almost America, Europe, Asia, Africa. I mean, I know that we have much more questions maybe than answers. Obviously, we need more enforcement. We need maybe more regulation. COVID, totally, we didn't expect that COVID transformed everything, and mainly, obviously, digitalization. We need training. We need education, something that you highlighted a lot. And we need involvement of all sectors, not only companies, as well governments, as well international organizations, academy, that can be very useful in order to understand the challenges and the reason to identify best practices. That I think this is a time to share best practices, not only in our countries, internationally, because this is a topic that impacts us globally. So thank you very much. I want to thank to all of you, organizers, to give me the opportunity to moderate this important webinar. We will have another webinar on August the 4th. Please follow Alliance for Integrity social media. You will have all the information there. And thank you for everybody. So, bye-bye.
Thank you so much also in the name of the Alliance for Integrity. Thank you for joining.
Bye, Mark.
And you will receive a survey right now to keep on updating. So, okay.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye.
Have a good day. Thank you very much. Thank you to the speakers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Have a good
Patricia.
day,
Bye,
everyone.
Frank. Nice to meet you.
Bye. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye, Sima. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mucho gusto. Tschüss.
Bye-bye.